Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us again. We're back with our series, Flex, God Looks at the Heart. We've got 5 more of these. We've got 5 more of these to go. We've got the first one tonight and then 4 more after that. And then we'll be done with this series and we'll move on to something else. I don't really have anything in terms of like announcements for tonight, other than, Happy New Year. I hope everybody had a good holiday break and able to spend it with their families or wherever you were safely and got to enjoy it. We are going to be working on some plans for the new year here in the next couple of weeks, and so then we'll have some more announcements after that time. Hey, Tanner. As always, if you're watching, put a comment down and let us know you're watching so that we can say hi to you. So we don't really have much of anything in terms of announcements, so we're just going to kind of get right to it. Like always, we have our guests. We have Jaiden and Paul with us, but we also have Savannah and Hayden as well. And so we're going to have those guests with us when it's time for Bible Book Club. So tonight's lesson is lesson 9. It's the heart of the willing. And so our key verse that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be focusing on 1 Samuel chapter 16, the whole chapter. But sort of the key verse that we need to focus on is sort of like the big one. It's the title. It's the title verse of our series, right? 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, it says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." God looks at the heart, the Lord looks at the heart. And that's kind of the whole point of our series, is that God is looking at our hearts, and there's different ways of our hearts to be, right? We've covered, let me get the other ones here. We've covered several other kinds of hearts, the hearts of selfishness, sin, servant, the heart of God, the heart of selfishness, selflessness, the heart of unrealized potential, faith, coward. And tonight it's the heart of the willing. And we're at that point in 1 Samuel where we're going to be talking about sort of the big guy, David, King David, and we'll get into more details about that in just a moment. So every Christian, though, has a calling. And when we hear that statement, we sometimes get nervous because we hear it used in an unbiblical way. How have you heard calling used?
I think mostly I've heard calling being used as like someone with like obvious talent for a specific role in the church. Right. It's like, you seem to be called to do this thing.
Like, you're such a great singer, you should be the worship leader. Or like, you're so good at teaching, you should be the preacher.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Like that should be your calling because you're so good at that.
Very specific roles.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the thing about calling. That's not the way the Bible uses that word. And much like other similar words like testify, witness, or charismatic, those are all really good biblical terms, but we rarely use them because of an unbiblical meaning attached to them. So calling is left unused because of its misuse. Because here's the thing. Calling in the most basic and pure sense simply refers to the gifts and talents that God has given us. That's it. That's it. There's nothing more to the word calling. There isn't this idea that God calls you to play a specific role, like in the church or in your family or whatever. That's not what we're going to be talking about, because that's not what calling is for. Calling is simply the talents and the gifts that God gives us. So they're kind of just like tools. God gives us these tools and we use them to live out various things that God wants us to do. And that's the important thing that we've got to remember there. So consider the following biblical uses of the word calling. In Romans chapter 11, verse 29, it says, "For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable." So once God gives you those gifts, no one can take them away. Now, can you lose them? We're going to talk about that. But can somebody take them away? No. Nobody can take away the gifts that God gives you. That's your calling. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 and 4. "As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. You were given these talents, you were given these tools to be part of the one Spirit and the one body. And 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9. He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. So he saved us and called us to a holy life. Again, he gave us all the tools to live a holy life. Oh, what is going on?
Something's breaking.
Something's buzzing over here, and I don't know what it is. All right, we will try to do our best with what we got here. Where was I? 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9, he gave us the tools to live a holy life. And so that is the calling that we have received. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 16, which is where we're going to be focusing tonight, David is called to be king over Israel. And we're going to read 1 Samuel chapter 16 here in a minute. Janelle's going to take care of that. And I know my camera's a little blurry. Sometimes it just kind of loses focus. There we go. Maybe
not. It's okay.
All right,
Some odd technical difficulties.
Odd tech stuff today. David is called to be king over Israel. And Israel had been ruled by judges for approximately 330 years. And so the judges, these are people like, can you name a judge?
Deborah.
Oh, very good. Another one?
I can, but you're putting me on the spot. It makes it difficult. You name one.
Elijah.
Okay.
Another one?
I know the song.
Oh.
Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah.
Oh,
you've
got deep cut judges
there.
So for 330 years, those people had been ruling Israel. But then about the year 1050 BC, they began crying out for a king, and eventually they got Saul, which we've covered in the past few lessons. So if you want to go back to those lessons, you can find out all about Saul there. Saul's reign began with promise. Like on paper, he was the right guy. And we talked about that. But it ended in trepidation and faithlessness. Saul was not a good king. And he did not live up to the expectations of the role. So chapter 16, verse 14 says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." Which is it's really grim.
Yeah, I don't really have a solution for why this happened, but we don't usually think of God as being someone who would on purpose send evil spirits.
Yeah. I suspect it's more just allowed it to happen instead of
maybe.
I don't know. But still, either way, it's kind of a grim prospect for the end of Saul's reign.
Yeah.
So when we read the story of David's calling, we see several applications for Christians today, and we're going to be talking about those as well. The greatest of those, though, is when God gives us a calling, we always answer. That's sort of the key of all this, and why the heart of the willing is so important. It's such a positive thing, because when God gives us the call, it gives us those tools, those talents, those skills, and we answer that call by using the talents and the skills that we've gained to do good in the world and in the body. That's what God wants us to do. But sometimes we answer with a yes, and that's great. But many times we kind of take the page out of Saul's playbook and hide among the baggage. Mm-hmm. Still, so funny. One of my favorite bits of the Bible. Just hiding in luggage. From the calling of David, we learn not only that God calls unexpected people to do unexpected things, but that he expects us to answer. We can't just ignore God. That's the thing about these callings, about receiving talents from God. We have to respond. And we don't get an option as to whether or not we're going to respond. We can't just leave God on red. Mm-hmm. We just can't. So I'm going to have Janelle read 1 Samuel chapter 16, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his attendants, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." One of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent him with his son David to Saul. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor-bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the Spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his lyre and play. Then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him.
I like how his servants are like, the Bible says, "And an evil spirit of the Lord was on Saul," and then the servants are like, "Hey, there's an evil spirit of the Lord in you."
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, this is a liar. That's a liar.
Just wanted to throw that out.
I just wanted to throw that out there because I'd grab the picture and stick it on there real quick. But that's what it looks like. It sounds nice from what I understand. So, okay, we've read the chapter. Let's kind of work this out into 3 points, right? So our first point is this: God chooses as he sees fit. So at first glance, David did not seem to be the appropriate choice. He had so many other brothers, and all of these other brothers were warriors. And they didn't even think of David initially. When Samuel shows up and is looking for a son of Jesse, they didn't even think of David. He's out with his sheep. He's probably the closest thing in the Bible to like Captain America in like the first Avenger, when he's like this like scrawny dude.
Oh,
but
see, I went.
And then he becomes like cool and powerful.
Sure, I always look at it more like Cinderella.
Oh.
It's like, is there anybody else in this house? And
Yeah.
There is one.
There is one, but you don't want him. Surely you don't want him.
Like, still talented. Just walked away doing other things.
Well, I mean, Steve Rogers was talented, and he was plucky and young.
Continue.
Anyway, he didn't seem like the appropriate choice. The sons of Jesse were all warriors except for David, and they didn't even think of him. They just left him out. He was out with his sheep still when they called. And so, as the sons of Jesse were presented in front of Samuel one by one, Samuel kept assuming that, oh, this one must be it, or this one must be it, or this one must be it. Like, look at this guy. What a fine specimen of a man. He's tall, he's handsome, he's strong, he's a warrior. Surely this is going to be the king of Israel. But the Lord continues to reject all of them. And so there's like this, you could almost hear the silence in the room when Samuel just says, is this it? Are these all the children? It's like, I want to like put myself in like Jesse's shoes for a minute as like this great honor that like the prophet Samuel is in my house and he's going to choose one of my sons, you know, based on the guidance of the Lord. He's going to choose one of my sons to be king. I'm going to be the father of a king. And then Samuel's like, is this it? No one even thought to send for David. It was still out there. And David would not have been Israel's first choice, but he was God's choice, right? Jesse was looking at his mighty warriors of sons to be the next king, particularly Eliab. He was the oldest, and he was already a high-ranking official in Saul's army. He already had the experience in leadership. So it makes sense, kind of on paper, for Eliab, again, to be the oldest, to be the strongest, and to have already had this military background. That, oh, this would be a great king. But God knows our strengths. And if you actually read on to chapter 17, we discover a little bit about Eliab. We actually discover that Eliab was a man full of fear, a man full of jealousy, anger, and greed. So in other words, God knows what he was doing because he was looking at the hearts of these 7 young men and discovering like these aren't the guys that I want leading my people. God was looking past that outward appearance straight into the heart of David. And so what did he see? He saw, like Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 23 says, he saw a shepherd of his people. And that's a really interesting way of looking at things because, again, it defies the regular sort of common expertise of what a king should be.
Well, and I'm going to
go for it.
A minute. I think it's very interesting that the way that later in the chapter, the way that David is described to the king is a fine man, a brave man, and a warrior. Now, this is before Goliath.
Yep.
This is before Goliath. So all we know about David, like in scripture, kind of is that like he's handled a bear and a lion. Like he's handled wild animals to keep the sheep safe. But like from David and Goliath, we get the impression that he's not really a warrior.
Right.
And yet he's described as one. So it's just a different kind. Like if he can take on those wild animals, he is a warrior of sorts, just not the military type of his brothers. I think about it in the same sense that like they still don't get it. They're going along with this because just God told them to. Because they know better than to try and cross God. But they still don't get it. Yeah. Like
they're still thinking in the same way that they were thinking about Saul.
Yeah. And we can talk more about that during the.
And we'll talk. We'll have our guests talk to us about that a little bit too. So I have a quick story. You ready?
Sure.
It's a fable.
Okay.
So we've got a story about a concert violinist and a bricklayer. They were brothers. Okay. So one day, a woman said to the bricklayer, "Oh, it must be wonderful to be in a family with such a famous violinist," which, like, rude, but okay. Then, not wanting to insult the bricklayer, she added, "Of course, we don't all have the same talent. Some just seem to have more than others." Again, like, rude lady, right? The bricklayer replied, "You're telling me that violinist brother of mine doesn't know a thing about laying bricks. And if he couldn't make some money playing that rotten old fiddle of his, he couldn't hire a guy like me to build a house. If he had to build a house himself, he'd be ruined." So the moral here is, because with these kinds of stories, you have to like spell out the moral. If you want to build a house, you don't want a violinist.
Sure.
And if you're going to lead an orchestra, you don't want the bricklayer. No two of us are exactly alike. So none of us have every gift and ability. Our responsibility is to exercise the ones that we do have, not the ones we wish we had. It may not seem like your calling is that great, but remember what the Lord said to Samuel. And that's our next point, that God looks upon the heart. So God chooses as he sees fit. He goes through and he examines very carefully. And when he chooses for a reason. But he looks at your heart when making those decisions. So when God chose David, he didn't look at the accomplishments that David had made, because at that point he was just a shepherd. He hadn't really had time to accomplish anything other than raise a few sheep. That's it. And even after his calling, even after we know that David has the God-given tools to be the king, and people know that he is going to be the king because he's going to be anointed, it takes years before he actually gets to serve in that capacity. It takes years from the moment he's anointed to when he becomes king, for him to serve that way. So God was preparing him to lead. So why did God choose David? Well, because he saw something deep in his heart, in the heart of David, that he didn't see in any of the others. He saw a young man after his own heart. And we know that's the thing that David is known for. Mm-hmm. That is the key thing. But he hadn't even had time to exercise that yet. He was a kid. And we only need to turn to 2 Samuel, which is mostly the story of King David's reign, that being a man after God's own heart does not require sinless perfection. It's not the same thing to be 100% perfect and to be looking after God's own heart. What it requires is someone who loves God above all and seeks to honor him with his life. God still looks upon our hearts when he calls us to serve in his kingdom. And he isn't looking for the talent you already have. He is looking for a willing heart that he knows will use the talents he gives. So, part 1, God chooses as he sees fit. Part 2, God looks upon the heart. And part 3, God expects us to answer his calling. We do not get the choice to ignore God. We have to answer. So Romans chapter 12, verse 6, Paul appeals to us to use the gifts God gives us. He says, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. Every Christian has been called by God to do something. And, for some people, it is like, you're a great singer, go be the worship leader. You're a great speaker, go preach. For some people, it is that. The question, though, we need to grapple with is, are you willing to use the talent God has called you to use? Because I can bet you that there's plenty of worship leaders out there who sing so great that they could just be singers, like in the world. And many speakers that could go into many other things, like politics or, lawyering, all sorts of other things that require public speech. But are we willing to use those talents that God gives us to do some of the things he wants us to do? That's the real question. Most of us are familiar with the parable of the talents from Matthew chapter 25. We would do well to remind ourselves of this parable before we begin to think, I don't know what my talent is. Simply put, maybe you had a talent, but you lost it because of your unwillingness to use it. We were talking before about how in Romans chapter 11, verse 29, God's gifts, as called, are irrevocable. Nobody can take your talent away, and God doesn't take it away. But you can lose it. But you can lose it if you don't use the talent, the skill. So I have another short story.
Okay.
Ready?
Sure.
Okay. So there's a group of seagulls that are starving in St. Augustine, Florida. This is actually a true story. This is a thing that really happened. It appeared in Reader's Digest. And if you know what that is, you are older than 35.
Except for you, apparently.
Well, it's written there, lesson materials. There were a group of seagulls that was starving to death in St. Augustine, Florida. So they weren't starving because of a food shortage. There was plenty of food, but it's because they had forgotten how to fish. So apparently, for years, decades, they had been relying on a shrimping fleet that operated out of St. Augustine. And they would go catch the shrimp and stuff and sell it. And the fishermen would drop all the scraps and everything. Oh, it looks like we're back. Yay. Would drop all the scraps and stuff, and the seagulls would get it. Easy meal. Didn't have to work for it. Easy peasy. But then the shrimp fleet moved from St. Augustine to Key West. So they left, and they weren't operating there anymore. And so the source of food kind of dried up. And the seagulls forgot how to fish. They had relied on this sort of generosity of the quote-unquote of the fishermen for so long that they forgot to use their natural God-given talents to fish. And they were starving to death. They hadn't used it. But this is a rule of nature. This is how it goes. If you do not use what you have, it will be taken from you. It'll just wither away because you won't be able to do it anymore. And that's the lesson in the parable of the talents. The servant who did not use the one talent lost it. So the next time you're asked to serve in the church, and I know these days that's more difficult than it sounds, realize that maybe God is using that opportunity to tell you what your true calling is. And before you say no, stop to ask yourself, am I saying no to this individual or am I saying no to God? Just imagine what would have happened if David had said no. What if he said, oh, let my brother do it. He's older than me. He has more experience. He's already been to war. Thanks for the offer, Samuel, but thanks but no thanks. Would he have been rejecting Samuel? Or would he have been rejecting God? So I'm going to leave you with this sort of mental illustration. God doesn't really ever beg anything from us. He doesn't really plead. But in this illustration, he's going to make a point. So imagine God coming to you with a big, beautiful package, right? It's like a big present. It's wrapped up, got all the bows and everything. You see the package and you say, no thanks. God replies, but I was thinking of you when I made this. You still reply, no thanks. Maybe somebody else can use it. God begins to plead. I had you especially in mind when I made this. No one else can use it. It fits you only. So that Cinderella bit actually works out a lot better. So I concede your Cinderella illustration is better.
Thank
you. No one else can use this gift. I made it especially for you. You begin to get frustrated and you say, I appreciate the thought, but I'm really not interested. And God makes one last attempt. Please, you don't understand. If you do not accept this gift, my kingdom will not be complete. Can you imagine ending that conversation by responding, I said no, go away. When we say no to our calling, we say no to God and we hurt his cause. Because that's the thing about God's cause. Yeah, his plan is perfect and it will result in the salvation of many. But we can hurt it. We can hurt it. We can hurt ourselves in the process. We can hurt other people from fully participating in that plan. The plan will happen, but we can hurt other people's participation in it, or even our own. Remember, David was the forefather of Jesus. What if David had said no? Some other person would have been chosen, right? And that would have been the forefather of Jesus. That was the biggest difference, though, between David and Saul. Saul looked for excuses and hiding places, and he thought about what was beneficial for himself. But King David looked for the very heart of God and how his service could be rendered to that cause. That's the difference. And that's the heart of the willing. Saul did not have the heart of the willing. And it's up to you to decide if you do. Okay, so that's what we've got for the main core lesson. We're going to bring in our friends here for our New Year installment, our first New Year installment of Bible Book Club.
Yay.
So Paul and Jaiden, hi guys, and Hayden and Savannah, welcome back. Did I mute you guys or did you mute you guys?
We muted it.
Mute yourself. Hold on, I need to turn on my speaker so I can actually hear what you're saying. Hi, welcome back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Oh, there's
Happy New Year.
What?
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Happy New Year. Welcome back. Okay, so initial thoughts? Where do we want to start?
I think there's a few things to this. I think one of the big things that got me thinking about this heart of the willing and this what they went through to find David is like going through all of these flashy, steadfast brothers and stuff like that. It kind of reminded me a bit of just like a little bit of experiencing and a little bit of seeing what some people go through growing up in a church where, some people show up to do all the right things. It's like, oh, well, like being a model son or daughter to someone is like, oh, they showed up to all this stuff kind of thing. It's like they got gold on every LTC thing and all that, and the service and the service and activities themselves aren't bad things, but from time to time, I felt this at some point, is just like, obligation overtakes and you're just kind of doing this for the sake of doing this. And it's like that I feel like it's that heart of willingness that really makes me think we got to watch out for, not letting obligation overtake us, and just like understanding why we're doing this, and internally, emotionally addressing what we're going through and how God helps with that kind of thing, and just how he affects our lives, and taking the time to really grow and understand that stuff. I think is, it becomes so much more valuable than, looking the part, but hollowing out on the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I wanted to go back for a second to like the Cinderella illustration, because it actually did end up being such as like a really good fit for what we were talking about. Like David, when Samuel was off looking for one of Jesse's sons, and it's like, okay, none of these guys are gonna cut it. Like, where is there anybody else? Is there somebody else that we're missing? And David comes in, and he's very different. He's described as looking very different. But then later it's like he's got the right foot for the slipper.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something that kind of took me off guard a little about reading the story this time. It's so often with David we get the timeline kind of mixed up. Like in our minds, David's story starts with Goliath. Mm-hmm. And that's just apparently, if you read, it's not the case. And that's the thing that I found interesting reading this time is like, yes, Samuel looked at Eliab and was like, surely this is the one. But that was like Saul. That's what the people chose in the first place. So of course for him, it's like, this has got to be it. Like it looks the part. That's what we're used to. And all these other sons go by. And besides age, David isn't really described all that differently from his brothers in this chapter. Right. He's good looking. Yeah. He's healthy. Yeah. He's described, strong. Yeah, he has success in his responsibilities, and later he's described as a warrior. So really, there's not that much different between him and his brothers besides
they just ignore him.
Besides the occupation. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. Like he's still been told, described as a warrior, but like he's called in to play an instrument. For a king. And I think it just so beautifully fits with this lesson, because it's like you can use your talent and be considered someone worthwhile, someone in God's kingdom who's doing something important. It doesn't have to be like, he didn't have to be like his brothers who were soldiers and who were, sent off when Goliath, like the Philistines do come. You can still be described as like this healthy warrior who's doing things and be ignored by people. I guess it's very interesting to me.
I wanted to get you guys' thoughts here as well on the way that David accepts his calling versus how Saul accepts his calling. I cannot remember what lesson you guys were with us for, Hayden and Savannah, like both of you. But I think by then we had already talked. Last time you were with us, we had talked about Saul and how he had accepted his call many times. So I figured that's kind of a fair. We've gone over it many times. So I wanted to get your guys' opinion there, like the difference here and why it's so profoundly important to emulate David and Saul.
With David, you don't really get feedback in the story. Like, he doesn't push back or be like, yippee, it's me. Like, he just kind of does it, which I like you don't.
He doesn't
even
respond
get,
at all,
yeah.
right? Like vocally, like it's just not written down at all. He just
It's not recorded.
Yeah, it's not recorded.
Yeah.
It is a breath of fresh air that no one is like complaining.
Yeah.
That like, oh, really, me?
Yeah, and at the same time, he's not like, suck it, brothers. Like, it was I was chosen. So it's kind of
Not
just
a Jonah situation.
Yeah.
there's nothing. There's a lack of like response there, which is very, very interesting because he's willing to just do it. Like, he has the shepherd task as well, where he's just like always out in the woods, putting himself in danger for like the flock and stuff. So maybe he just responds well. His dad's like, oh, can you go do this? And he's like, yeah, I'll do it. So he's very easygoing.
I wonder if like before he becomes king, David is just a really quiet kind of, reserved kind of guy since he is out in the fields all the time with just sheep, and his talent for music is simply because like he's sitting around all day with these sheep and he needs something to do. And he just doesn't really communicate all that much verbally with people. And so that was a really good point. It's like maybe that's just how he's used to dealing with things. He just does it and that's it.
Well, and something that caught me, and it's caught me before, but more this time than usual. Because David was chosen as king before he was playing for Samuel, right? Or for Saul, right?
Right.
That's so weird to me. Because like this guy's like, okay, I'm going to be king someday, but I'm going to go play for this king who I'm going to replace eventually. But he doesn't say anything. He doesn't like rub it in his face. He keeps it on the down low. Like,
if it
what
weren't
an
for
awkward
God,
situation.
If it weren't for God, like the timeline of all of this is so dangerous to David. Like,
weird. It is so
here's
weird.
a guy who's being anointed by the prophet of Israel as the next king, but we still have a king. Like, he's still there. He's still alive. He's still commanding all of this army and all this stuff. He could really easily just and he tries. I mean, and we know that Saul tries to hold on to his authority and his power, and he tries to get rid of David. But it puts David at such a risk, which I think is more interesting. It makes it more interesting that he just goes along with it,
right?
Because David's not dumb.
Because also, like, it takes a while. Like, Saul likes him. Saul tells Jesse, he has pleased me. He's helping me. I want him around. But Samuel was worried that Saul would have him killed just for going to go down and do this task. So it is, I think it just goes to show, like, yes, it took years for David to get where he's supposed to be, but God still gave him an entry point where it's like, this is where you're going to start. Now you're in the area that I need you to be in. And you're using the talents I gave you to serve. And like, God makes it work out for him with each step.
Well, I think it's also important to remember that, like, yes, despite being king and being in power, Saul didn't want to be king.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yes, once you're there and once you have the authority, it's really hard to give up. But he didn't want to do it in the first place.
Right.
So I don't know how threatening it would have been to him personally to have David around.
Yeah. And I don't know how David felt during the transitions that he went through, but it is kind of nice that it's like, okay, I start with playing the lyre for the king. I become friends with his son. I fight Goliath. So now I have the experience that I've used against wild animals in a military setting. Like it's when we go through life, I don't think we see things as clear cut, of course, as when we read things in the Bible. But it's good because it reminds us to look back and it's like, where did I start with this task? Like, where did I start and what are the steps? Because they do end up feeling fairly natural when we look at it.
Just looking at, just taking a moment to see how many hats he wore through all this stuff before he became king.
Oh my gosh. But also a musician for the king.
And then an armor bearer.
Armor bearer, and then warrior. And
But yeah, like you said, it just kind of all connects and leads to something very purposeful.
Yeah.
Like,
but it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't willing to just go along with it and be like, yeah, I can. That is a skill I have. Let's use it in this really bizarre situation. It worked.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. And in my head, thinking about like David being like all these things to the king, whilst in the back of his head knowing, okay, someday this is going to be my position. Like, I don't know. Part of me would be like, yes, I'm forming this friendship on not necessarily a lie, but I'm not telling something really important that I know.
It's now conditional kind of feeling.
Yeah, like,
it would be hard not to feel
almost
that
feel
way.
like I'd be stabbing him in the back once I became king. I'd be like, and by the way, I'm booting you out of your seat. And like, it's not like that, and I get it because God has placed it. So I think he had enough faith in God to just be like, I'll let you handle this. I will just do what I need to do now. But in my head, it would just be so weird knowing that and like forming those relationships and not telling them.
It's probably a big reason why he was picked. Is that like through all this time, even though he knew he was going to be king,
he didn't say anything.
He was like, "All right, I'll do this. All right, I'll do this." As opposed to more people being like, "All right, you said it's right. The throne's right there.
Like, why am I not on it yet?"
Yeah, I think that makes it easier that Saul does try to kill him a couple times before he goes into hiding and comes back. It's like okay, oh, we're not.
This relationship makes sense.
We're not friends anymore. Okay, cool. Yeah.
All right. So I think
we've exhausted that.
We've talked enough about David. Let's talk about this idea of a calling. At the beginning, we sort of helped define according to Scripture what a calling is, and that it's really this idea of just the talents that we've been given, not that God wants us to do a very specific role in a specific place at a specific time. Although sometimes God calls people that way. That for most of us, that's not really what his calling is. His calling is just gifting talents.
I think the way it was described tonight as, hey, a calling is just a talent that you have, and you can choose to use it or you can lose it. Like, I feel like it takes some of the pressure off of like finding it. Like we were saying in the beginning, like people being like, oh, what is my purpose? What is my calling? What am I supposed to do? It's most likely going to come, well, I can't say it's most likely to come naturally, but I feel like at a certain point, it will come naturally. Like, you don't have to work so hard to seek it out. You have a talent, whether you know it or not, and it will be revealed to you, I guess.
I think you eventually realize, oh, I'm good at this.
Yeah.
And the question then becomes, well, then how do I use it?
Yeah. And I think it takes a lot of the pressure off of being like, I have to like work really hard to like hone this one thing and like then apply it and then like make sure that I'm using it properly and make sure that I continue. Like, it's not so structured. It's just like you said, I'm good at this. How can I use it? Like this? Awesome. And then you just do it.
Well, I also think deep in our hearts, we know when we're neglecting that kind of thing. And I think another like big, like you said, then comes the question of how we use it. And then I think another roadblock for some people is maybe like I feel like from time to time there comes this air of assumption where like there's only a small amount of things that can be done in the church, and those are the godly talents or what have you. But like
It's like, yes, I can pray, I can sing, I can preach.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Those are the three.
Can you sing? Can you talk? Can you do speeches? But like, it's so much more than that. Like, we do have like an exponential amount of different talents and stuff. And I think one thing we need to remember is there are thousands of ways we can help our brothers and sisters, and that is still godly work too.
Right. Yeah. And so is going out to the world as well, and
Yeah.
helpful there too.
The bricklayer can
lay bricks.
give a home for someone and stuff
Right.
like that kind of thing.
Hayden, Savannah, do you have thoughts?
I know
If you don't,
I
it's
feel like we're
fine,
like
but we don't want
taking over the conversation too much, and we don't want to leave you guys out.
No, it's just they're all good points. It's like I don't want to just
No, jump in,
butt
please.
in. No, so yeah, I'm trying to figure out like something that already hasn't been covered. No, I think it's a good point that you guys were making, that it's not just not just talents that are like directly inside of the building of the church, or not just talents that are directly, you think like, oh, I'm doing this specifically for like a godly purpose. It's your talent can still be for a godly purpose if it's just going out into the world and just doing something good. I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, the idea of broadening what a godly purpose is, is something that I think we fail to do that regularly when we're at church, when we're at like a worship service or a sermon or whatever. We kind of fail to broaden that idea, because it often does come down to just, well, can you sing, can you preach, can you pray?
What can you do on a Sunday morning?
What can you do on a Sunday morning, right?
I think people kind of get locked into, because I think it's in 1 Corinthians 12 or Romans 12 as well, like we were talking about earlier, where it's just there's lists.
Yeah, it's a list of talents.
You do, yeah, right. Like you can. Some people can speak in tongues. Some people can decipher what words are spoken in tongues. Some people, and it's just a list. And I feel like a lot of people snap to those lists and think like, oh, this one of these things needs to be my calling in
Like,
church and life, or whatever it is.
Which Hogwarts house do I fit in?
Yeah.
I think it's also like good to point out though that everything that David did helped him to develop a skill or like a characteristic he needed to be a ruler eventually. Mm-hmm. So like he was a shepherd at one point, which taught him how to like lead and like protect things. And so he had all these different like tasks in life or like stations to go through, which all prepared him in the end to be like a leader for the Lord. So I think like you can be a leader in your own right or like in your own area and still be godly, and then just like all the situations or preparations you have to go through help you to develop that character, as long as you're taking the opportunity to, or like willing to like persevere through whatever.
Right.
Well, and I think that's really interesting too, because we talked so much about potential of people earlier on in this series, and the willingness is like really what drives that potential to become something. So I don't know, in my life, with work, with school, with different things, I'm like, I think I've reached my limit on this. Like, I know how to do this, but I can't see myself doing that. And it's really not that far of a leap. It's just I'm uncomfortable with it, and I don't want to I don't want to grow that way, because it means more responsibility, or it's going to make me anxious. It's going to make me uncomfortable. But then when we say no to those opportunities, like we won't get to those places where God is like, this is what I have prepared and you're here. So I need you to like take those steps, because you're already, I already gave you the tools. You're already in the position here. So like just keep working and I'll get you to the next place. But if we say no to those opportunities, like we're not going to go anywhere in life or in our relationship with God.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say we all want like a 6-figure job out of the gate or something like that. But I still stand by, as every single one of us can learn a huge amount from a fast food job, like especially in the beginning. Oh my goodness.
So, to kind of transition from that, like let's talk about the parable of the talents for a moment. The one from Matthew chapter 25. For those out there that don't know, which I doubt there's many of you, but just in case. So it's about this rich man, and he gives talents, and in the Bible, talents are actually a measure of money. They're an amount of money. And he's got 3 servants. To one servant, he gives 5 talents. To another servant, he gives 2. And to the third servant, he gives 1. The Lord goes away. The ruler or whatever goes away, the boss, on a trip. And the men with the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they manage to double those talents. But the one with the 1 talent just buries it. Mm-hmm. When the Lord comes back, he's happy because the man with the 5 talents suddenly comes back and he's got 10. The man with 2 comes back, he's got 4. Good. But the one that buried it just goes and digs it up, and he's just got the 1. And he gets in trouble, and he loses the 1 talent that he was given because he didn't even try to do anything with it because he was quote unquote afraid of his master. So we use that parable tonight as an allegory of talents, in the sense that we know them, skills and gifts, and that if you don't use them, if you bury them, like the servant with the 1 talent, that it gets taken away from you, like you lose it. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the other half of that equation. The ones that were given 5 and 2 doubled their talents. Mm-hmm. So there's a way to gain more talents as we develop ourselves. And I think, to Savannah's point, this idea that David, as a shepherd, as a warrior, and even as a musician, those are all skills that sort of doubled because they were useful in those areas at that time, but then later they were also useful in his life as a ruler. And I just wanted to get your thoughts about the concept of doubling your talents or receiving more talents later on.
Oh, I absolutely believe that.
Good.
Yeah, go ahead, Nelly. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think we kind of already touched on it, where it's like when you say yes to opportunities that kind of line up with what you're already doing, and it grows you, like that is kind of how you gain talent. I think now look at it more as like, yeah, I did well here, so I got more responsibility. So there's more to what I do now. Yeah. But if I think we can make it more positive by looking at it as like talents. Like, hey, I did well here, so this opportunity came up, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna try my best. And if it's something God wants me to be doing, it'll go well, and I'll get more. And if it doesn't work out, then maybe that's not the opportunity I was meant to progress into.
I think it's also important to mention that, like, it's important within our groups or with, like, 4Sixteen, for example, and, like, new people coming in, it's important to notice, like, who's not involved or who's not maybe participating as much and pull them up. Yeah. Because, like, when I was a counselor at Bible camp, like, that was my role, was to go tell the, like, lonely kids and make them either friends with each other or just talk to them for a little bit, which never made me the most popular counselor, but like I like had a position there to like show them how to like have those social skills to like talk to others. So it is important. Show them the ropes, right? Yeah, because Samuel didn't notice David, but like God noticed David, and like God is in all of us, as in like everybody, and so it's important to just like notice that spirit and nurture that in other people, even if they're not the most like talkative person, or even if they don't like sing the best. Like in Mount Vernon, there's somebody who's like is taking singing lessons now so he can do song leading, but he did not sing very well. But he was just like, okay, there's not a lot of people doing it, so I'll like, his mom was like, oh, let's do singing lessons, and he was willing. And you've kind of tied it all nicely in a perfect little bow for us tonight. This idea that like we can gain more talents, we can serve in these ways. Our calling is our tools, not so much the specific thing that we do, but ultimately it all comes down to our willingness to do it, our willingness to grow, our willingness to work with our talents, work through our talents, help raise other people up in their talents. Because I'm sure all of us here tonight, we can point to other people that helped us along in a talent, right? Yeah. Like all of us can point to somebody and say, hey, this person helped me be
what I am in, like again, in singing or in, in leadership or in this other thing. There's always some other person that we can point to do that, and that's kind of that is a talent in and of itself, is being able to help other people develop their skill and develop their talent. There's plenty of not to beat the dead horse of singing here for too much, but like there's plenty of singers out there that are terrible teachers that cannot teach people how to sing. They're great singers, they're great worship leaders, they can do all of that stuff, but they cannot pass that along. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just not their talent. But they still know that they're good at this thing, and they can serve the Lord that way. But that is a talent in and of itself, to pinpoint sort of latent talents in other people and help them develop them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we're in our last couple of minutes here. I just want to thank you guys again for doing this. We're kind of at the home stretch here for our series. We've got 4 more, and next week's lesson is the heart of courage. The heart of courage. So if I remember correctly, that's Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
That's Goliath. So thank you, Hayden and Savannah, for joining us this week. I know I called you in kind of at the last minute, but I appreciate you guys.
Thanks for being willing.
Yeah,
and
thanks for being
taking
willing. Paul and Jay, thanks again for being with us as well. And I know you guys will be back next week. We'll have an additional guest next week. Not sure who yet. I'm going to find out tomorrow. But so, and as always, everybody stay safe out there. Things are still pretty crazy, with COVID and a bunch of other things too. So just please be safe. We love you guys. Have a good night. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.